El doctor Joseph Leonard Lengmang es un experto en construcción de paz y resolución de conflictos, con más de 17 años de experiencia en gobierno, desarrollo internacional y organizaciones no gubernamentales. Como asesor de paz y conflictos especializado en la gestión estratégica de actores, ha liderado iniciativas emblemáticas de paz en el Estado de Plateau, Nigeria, y ha asegurado financiamiento sustancial para programas de prevención de conflictos y construcción de paz con socios como USAID y la Oficina de Desarrollo Exteriores del Reino Unido. Su trabajo se centra en paz y seguridad, mediación, gobernanza y seguridad humana, respaldado por un sólido marco de políticas y herramientas de planificación estratégica. Anteriormente, Lengmang se desempeñó como director general de la Agencia de Construcción de la Paz del Estado de Plateau, donde dirigió un plan estratégico quinquenal, negoció acuerdos de paz y coordinó esfuerzos de alerta temprana y respuesta temprana entre actores estatales y no estatales. Es un educador e investigador comprometido en estudios de paz, con experiencia de campo y publicaciones sobre policía comunitaria, desarme, desmovilización y reintegración, DDR en inglés, construcción de paz local y dinámicas de seguridad regional. Lengmang posee un MBA en sostenibilidad y una maestría MPhil en relaciones internacionales, además de estudios doctorales en curso en la Universidad de Celius, Bolonia, Italia. Sus credenciales incluyen certificaciones en negociación, género e intervención humanitaria y gobernanza sensible al conflicto. Está afiliado a la Asociación Nigeriana de Ciencia Política, la Asociación Internacional de Investigación para la Paz, CODESRIA, y la Red de Desarrollo Colaborativo para la Paz, y el grupo de trabajo CAICID en Austria. Bueno, we want to welcome then Dr. Joseph Leng. Okay. Let's
all right.
I switch to English, and then I'm going to project your PowerPoint.
Okay, fantastic. You can go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Perdóname mucho. Soy Joseph Lengmang. La verdad es que me cuesta mucho hablar en español ahora porque he olvidado todo. Hace mucho tiempo que yo hablo en español, pero me voy a hacer mi presentación en inglés, hoping that you would understand me, and then maybe the internet would be so kind to be stable enough for you to understand what I'm saying. I am very, very, very sorry for the disruption. I thought I could get a better network, a server, but I got to realize that they are working on their technology and trying to do some turnaround maintenance. And of course, we're having very limited internet service here. Notwithstanding, let me try to see if we can make it work this time around. So it's a pleasure being here. And I must also thank my friend, Dr. Jose, whom I haven't seen for almost 20 years. But of course, we communicate from time to time. I'm so pleased and happy to see you here. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts and some ideas and some reflections about the topic that we have, that I am presenting to you today, Regional Security Cooperation in West Africa, where I live in Nigeria, to be specific, in a small city called Jos, in north central part of Nigeria. So I want to just run through some of the things I have, articulated in the PowerPoint presentation. Regional Security Cooperation in West Africa, challenges, innovations, and strategic directions in the fight against insurgency and terrorism. For those of you who perhaps are somewhat familiar with what is happening in Africa, and to be specific, in West Africa and perhaps in Nigeria, where I come from, we experience a lot of insecurity for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to talk about the reasons why we have insecurity today, but just to talk about, how much cooperation amongst member states in West Africa, particularly the ECOWAS regional organization, sub-regional organization, that's the Economic Community of West African States, how they work together, how they cooperate in order to ensure that they, transform some of these debilitating challenges as far as security, peace and security in Africa or West Africa is concerned. So we look at the challenges, We look at the innovations and also the strategic directions in the fight against insurgency and indeed terrorism. Going to the next slide. Yeah, it's some kind of an outline for the presentation, which of course I have done earlier. Background to insecurity in West Africa, the institutional framework for cooperation that the respective national governments across the 15 ECOWAS countries have adopted to work together for peace and security. And we would also look at some of the challenges that they are facing and the efforts they are making to dealing or tackling these challenges within the West Africa sub-region. Next slide. So before we go further, it's very important that perhaps we look at the context in which we are having this conversation and also the rationale why security cooperation matters in West Africa. And the idea essentially is that which slide am I? Okay, the idea is that regional cooperation indeed enhances efficiency, and it also gives legitimacy and creates that sense of resilience in addressing cross-border issues that's amongst or between the 15 West African countries. And in doing so, I have also thought about some kind of a testable proposition, and which is regional cooperation improves quite a number of things that makes their cooperation very seamless. One of which is that it improves information sharing, and that it reduces response latency, and also that it stabilizes policy implementation compared to one country going it all alone, compared with unilateral action. And the key references I'm going to be using here as we go into the discussion is that ECOWAS, of course, the Economic Community of West African State, which is our sub-regional organization. Then you also have the African Union Peace and Security Architecture, which is also very critical to the success of the work that ECOWAS is doing in the sub-region. Then there is another framework, which is the Multinational Joint Task Force, which is a mechanism put together, a military kind of a framework put together by all the 15 countries. And then you have another G5. The G5 is also, within the Sahel region, which we are going to employ today as illustrative case studies. So cross-border realities are central to West Africa's security dynamics. That is a fact, because we have very porous borders. Transforming localized incidents into regional concerns. That is to say, if early warning information is not synchronized across borders, response times often lengthen and opportunities for preventing escalations are lost. So the idea is that we are working together, sharing information for us to be able to douse tension, or to prevent the likelihood of any security breach erupting into a serious crisis for the sub-region. Now, there are other issues that we're also dealing with, aside from the cross-border issues. There is terrorism, there is banditry, and there is also what is called farmer-herder tensions, which, of course, has become a topical issue within the sub-region. So therefore, the rationale, as far as this conversation is concerned, for a security cooperation between these national governments is to have a coordinated response, which is rooted in shared intelligence, harmonized rules of engagement, joint stabilization programs, of course. And then the question is, all of this, if it's not well taken care of, can disrupt escalation and reduce if they are well taken care of, can disrupt escalation and reduce civilian harm. These dynamics are not merely military. That we must state very clearly. They are equally governance and development challenges. So the regional frameworks, like I've mentioned earlier, again, the ECOWAS, African Union, sub-regional groups, mechanisms like the multinational joint task force, like I've said earlier on, and the G5 Sahel. They all provide legitimacy and capacity scaling. They create predictable processes that help governments commit to sustain action, even as national context differ. So, from an analytic standpoint, this section that I have just highlighted raises a testable proposition. Regional cooperation enhances efficiency and legitimacy in addressing cross-border security threats compared with unilateral action. And we'll return to this proposition as we examine concrete frameworks and practices. So having established the rationale, we now turn to the evolving security dynamics that shape these frameworks, right? So the security landscape, can we go to the next slide, if you don't mind, the slide 4 now. As you can see, the security landscape is shifting from this, farmer-herder conflict and banditry that I've mentioned. The landscape is shifting from localized insurgencies to networked transnational threats. And local insurgencies increasingly leverage cross-border mobility and governance gaps, creating spillovers that demand simultaneous security and development responses within the regional continent, which is within the ECOWAS region. This evolution has humanitarian implications and consequences. Of course, it leads to displacement of people and communities, and protection needs. And also protection needs. They also grow as a result of this situation. Health services, education services are all affected. And therefore, stability requires a multi-sectoral approach that pairs security interventions with humanitarian and indeed development efforts. So these are issues that we deal with. If we were to analyze this evolution empirically, you would examine patterns such as attack footprints, displacement flows, and border control metrics to quantify spillover risk. And this data, of course, help us test hypotheses about where cooperation yields the greatest returns and how to tailor interventions to evolving threats. Now, to operationalize responses, we need to understand, like I've pointed out earlier, the guiding frameworks that structure practice on the ground. And of course, that takes us to slide 5, if you're following me, Dr. Hussein. And this is basically where we try to conceptualize regional security cooperation, which is very key to this conversation. And the key frameworks, like you've seen, which I've highlighted, the key frameworks includes the ECOWAS mediation, the African Union, African Union Peace and Security Architecture, the Multinational Joint Task Force, and the G5 Sahel. They all provide a layered legitimacy, resources, and political cover for that cooperation. And all these frameworks essentially are not isolated. They interlock through shared objectives and mechanisms. And the core principles are, of course, sovereignty in action. States participate in regional platforms voluntarily. That means no one is forced to be a part of this framework. And a major principle is about burden sharing. And that burden sharing helps in relieving pressure on any single state. And then, of course, the question of legitimacy stemming from transparent and participatory processes. So, crucially, security governance now extends beyond the military. Now, there are other issues that goes with it: anti-corruption safeguards, governance reforms, and development linkages help in addressing root causes of insecurity. And this integration helps ensure that security measures are sustainable and legitimate in the eyes of the local national populations. So let's now map these frameworks, perhaps on practical architectures that implement these principles. And that takes us to the next slide. We move from macro frames to the practical institutions that translate this policy into action on the ground. And so that's the institutional frameworks in practice within the ECOWAS region. We have the ECOWAS Early Warning Network. And this is because regional bodies operate through a network of mechanisms, right? So we say the ECOWAS, early warning networks, rapid response mechanisms like the multinational joint task force operations and the G5 Sahel coordination. Each adds specific capabilities in terms of surveillance, in terms of joint planning cycles, in terms of deployments augmented by clear command channels. Because here we are essentially looking at the military component of the cooperation and what it involves. Now, at the subnational level, so I'm not just talking about the national, but even at the subnational levels, you would recall that Dr. Jose mentioned that I have been the head of an institution at the subnational level. It's called the Plateau State Peace Building Agency, with clear structures, of course. These agencies bring policy to the local level, and they provide it provides credible local legitimacy, of course, and can also mobilize timely interventions at the subnational levels, even down to the community realities as we see it. Of course, coordination is not seamless. There are differences in timetables, command structures, and funding flows often can impede unity of effort. We will see that more in a very comprehensive fashion if we get into the other slides. Yet the remedy lies in clear channels defined by define authorities and shared dashboards to monitor progress and gaps. And this gives you an insight into how the ECOWAS institutional framework works in practice. With these mechanical underpinnings in place, of course, the challenges, like I've said, are much. It's not enough that you have these institutional frameworks. How they are operationalized and how they deliver results, I mean, is what really matters. And that indeed takes us to what the challenges are, what threatens, these coherence, and what impedes upon the capacity of these institutional components to deliver results and to also to meet expectations in that respect. So before we propose reforms, it's very important also that we understand these obstacles, the structural, political, and operational that constrain the cooperation of ECOWAS in this region. So that takes us indeed to slide number 7. Like I've said earlier, these challenges have been persistent. I mean, it's not a one-off thing. I mean, right from the onset of the formation of these institutions, we've had these challenges indeed. The first challenge, structural and political, are very crucial, because they speak to national security concerns, and they also limit. Can you go back a bit? Let me see. Okay, it's okay. That's fine. Structural divergent priorities, like I've said, leadership turnover on even budgets. These are very serious challenges. Structurally divergent national security priorities and leadership turnover on even budgets erode continuity. One government will come today with its own agenda and it leaves the stage, another government comes and it changes its own agenda completely. And that has been a major setback for the operations of ECOWAS. And then some will have these multi-year commitments, and performance-based budgeting indeed can mitigate these effects, but they require sustained political will and institutional discipline. So politically, electoral cycles also are different. I mean, Nigeria doesn't go through elections at the same time with Senegal, for example, or with Burkina Faso, for example, or with Ghana. So electoral cycles and shifting coalitions can reset reform agendas. ECOWAS could have a consensus today, and then tomorrow you have a different government with a different agenda, and that changes everything. So it's a big challenge. Building cross-party consensus could help stabilize reform trajectories, ensuring programs survive political changes. But that is also a very big issue that is yet to be seen. But the major challenge also is a question of resource gaps. They are a practical constraint because states differ in capability and willingness to fund regional initiatives. A predictable financing architecture, for example, perhaps including blended finance or regional funding pools, would help to reduce volatility and increase predictability in this sense. Accountability and continuity are also important. Weak oversight can erode trust and compliance with regional accords. A robust multi-stakeholder oversight framework supported by transparent reporting is essential for legitimacy and effectiveness. And these are some of the major challenges that we have. Taken all together, these challenges point to a central research question. How can regional frameworks institutionalize continuity and learning in the face of political budgetary cycles? So these are some of the points that I really want you to think about. National security concerns, limit coordination, of course, political instability, the differences in election cycle, or even resource commitment itself, and weak accountability and transparency framework within or amongst the member states tend to impede the capacity of this sub-regional organization to be effective as far as cooperation for peace and security is concerned. So beyond political considerations, there are operational and humanitarian realities that must be addressed cooperatively. And that takes us to the next slide, which is the persistent challenges part 2 that we are discussing. Can you go to the next slide, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Jose?
Yes.
Okay.
The next slide. Okay.
Okay, fantastic. So operationally, cross-border intelligence coordination hinges on harmonized standards, like I've stated earlier. In this sense, data governance and privacy protections are very key. Without common protocols, information sharing itself remains slow or even fragmented. So legitimacy, like I've said earlier on, hinges on minimizing civilian harm. Whatever operations that ECOWAS is going to to carry out to deal with insurgency or terrorism in itself has to enjoy some level of legitimacy if there is a minimal, civilian harm. Clear rules of engagement, proportionality, and accountability mechanisms are essential to maintain trust and public support. But in some cases, when that happens, when there is a deployment or some kind of a peacekeeping deployment, we tend to have a lot of issues with that because the rules of engagement are usually not very clear. And sometimes the legitimacy question is raised in a way that, discourages rather than encourage the regional organization. Security operations must be planned with humanitarian actors to protect civilians and maintain aid access, which is key. Post-conflict recovery, reconstruction and livelihood programs are also critical to prevent relapse into violence. In the Sahel Lake Chad corridor, for example, these dynamics are especially salient. Climate stress, displacement, and cross-border movement intersect with security actions. And as we are going to see in the next slides, it explores innovations that have begun to address these cross-cutting issues. And I think it's important that we now turn to these concrete innovations and practices that have shown promise as far as this regional context or the success of ECOWAS is concerned. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes.
The Sahel Lake Chad nexus, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like I've mentioned earlier on, climate stress and resource scarcity tend to amplify tensions in the Sahel Lake Chad corridor. Water scarcity, grazing pressures, and resource competition intensify local grievances, which can in turn spill over into violence if not managed through cooperative governance. And therefore, mobility and displacement also introduce protection challenges and stretch service delivery in receiving communities. Coordinated border management and shared early warning systems help manage these flows and reduce vulnerability. So these are some of the innovations that have been adopted. And as we can see from the slide, basically two pronged approach: the climate resource dynamics, displacements, cross-border. On the other hand, innovation in joint border management and also early warning and also early response. Cross-border cooperation is essential because joint border management, harmonized monitoring, and shared signals enable more effective management of mobility while protecting the rights and safety of all affected populations. So in short, climate risk, resource governance, displacement, and border dynamics collectively shape outcomes in this region. The innovations we discuss next are designed to address these interlinked challenges. So as we examine practical innovations and emerging practices that strengthen governance and security, we'll have more insights into what ECOWAS and its partners are doing on the ground to deal with the challenges of peace and security within the West Africa sub-region. And in doing that, community-based early warning systems, which is a component developed by the ECOWAS to deal with the challenges of peace and security. And then, of course, we have even non-state actors that are working in conjunction with ECOWAS to manage that early warning system. There is this West African network of peace practitioners. Their role is that they empower local actors to detect threats early and then to enable timely interventions, and by so doing, they also enhance community legitimacy. Like I've mentioned earlier on, also the peace-building agency, the agency that I've headed, is a model in itself because it was the first ever to be established at the subnational level in Nigeria. And it illustrates how a subnational peace agency can translate formal processes into locally grounded peace building, aligning community-driven peace initiatives, even with national policy, and therefore, or perhaps largely speaking, national or sub-regional policy itself. And there's also the component of the civil-military dialogue platforms, which is provided as formal channels for helping to build trust, reducing misperceptions, and also improving compliance with agreed procedures within the ECOWAS framework. The cross-border peace committees at the border levels also foster local resilience and cooperative management among neighboring communities, strengthening social cohesion and reducing friction points. Of course, technologies and data practices further refine these efforts. And we will return to the data landscape after outlining perhaps specific examples. And then speaking of data, probably we will turn to technology and intelligence sharing, including governance safeguards and ethical considerations that ECOWAS often employ to deal with the challenges of peace and security. So we can go to the next slide.
Yes.
So technology and intelligence sharing, it's essentially speaking about digital surveillance. ECOWAS uses, the next slide, please, Jose, sorry. The next slide.
Yes.
Yeah. The technology that is being deployed essentially is more about intelligence sharing, and it begins with digital surveillance. Like I've said, you can see the drones, satellites, and imagery of ECOWAS often utilize that in tracking down risk threats, security threats, activities of insurgencies, and terrorists within the region. They have a shared database and communication platforms to deal, of course, with cyber threats and also data protection concerns. And it also highlights the need for interoperability and indeed trust. Shared databases and interoperable platforms reduce decision timing. However, they require clear standards too, some of the challenges, governance, and also trust partners to function effectively. Cyber threats and data protection must be integrated into risk assessment, which is key. That's what ECOWAS does. Because robust security measures, depend on seriously on access control and privacy protections. These are key elements that indeed are non-negotiable as they, deploy technology and intelligence sharing in dealing with the challenges of peace and security within the sub-region. Finally, the question of trust and ethics are foundational. They've established audit mechanisms. They have oversight boards and transparent data use policies to ensure responsible use of technology and data. External partners also play their roles in all of this. They shape regional outcomes as well. It's not just about ECOWAS or the 15 countries within the ECOWAS who are working in a very cooperative fashion to respond to the challenges of insecurity in their region. They are often assisted. It involves the partnership or the cooperation of partners, regional partners, and also external actors. like I've hinted. Collaborations also has to do with, domestic efforts of non-governmental organizations or even local faith-based organizations on the ground. So in time, let's go to the next slide. Regional partnerships and external actors. External actors like the UN, for example, or the European Union or France or US, they provide support through bilateral partnership or even multilateral partnership. So many of them provide training, funding, and technical expertise that can accelerate progress. However, there is a real risk of also over-reliance on these partnerships. That's one of the basic critique. Too much reliance. For many years, ECOWAS have depended so much on the US or on the European Union or Germany and all of that. So the question of local ownership hasn't taken roots, that much. If collaborations are to be carefully designed, then the question of ownership must also be answered. It's very critical, because if you don't own the framework, then it means that you are also open to all sorts of manipulations and all that, and you could easily be sabotaged. We've seen cases in point where ECOWAS have taken a decision, but ultimately their decision was sabotaged. Have I lost you?
No, we're here.
Okay, so sustainability hinges on strengthening domestic leadership and capacity. So it's very important to align aid with national strategies. And that will require some monitoring and building capacity so reforms endure after even external funding, is over. So there are practical safeguards, like I've also hinted earlier. They include co-design of the programs. Is very important, just so that ownership to take place. Then the transparent reporting is also very key, and a clear timeline for transition, like I've said. The success of ownership and inclusive governance is tied to all of this. But like I said earlier on again, I mean, the question of local ownership is still a very big deal for the ECOWAS to manage. Because inclusive governance is about broad-based participation, right? It's about budgets for community peace and initiatives and all that. It's a core mechanism for legitimacy and resilience. Broad-based participation diffuses grievance. It builds ownership of peace agreements and strengthens compliance through social buy-in. And practical steps to operationalize inclusion includes engaging even traditional institutions, because we have traditional institutions in Africa, and they are well respected. They enjoy some measure of legitimacy. It also includes integrating women and youths. So that's what establishing an inclusive platforms would mean. But a dedicated budget is also very important to make it functional, essentially for community peace initiatives, and also ensuring transparent participatory budgeting processes. Now, how do we measure impact? Measuring impact is essential, because tracking participation metrics, budget allocations for inclusive governance, and perceived security improvements within the communities to assess progress and recalibrate approaches is very important metric for measurement. So with inclusive governance as a foundation, we now turn to the strategic directions. What concrete reforms and indicators can test and practitioners, as a matter of fact, can implement. So let's go to the next slide.
Yes.
Which is strategic directions, right? Here we're referring to reform priorities and how they harmonization of goals and objectives, sustainable financing, civil military coordination, and accountability. So one part to strengthening security governance is harmonization. Reducing overlap across ECOWAS, the African Union, and the G5 Sahel by aligning mandates and reporting cycles enables more coherent action and joint planning. Sustainable financing is essential, like I've said earlier on, because there has to be a multi-year funding streams for whatever activities they are doing to succeed. And so the whole question of exploring blended finance and considering regional funding pools with clear accountability and performance indicators are key success factors for sustainable financing. Civil military coordination in this sense should also be formalized, I think, through liaison rules, joint planning cycles, and shared standards. Effectiveness can be measured through joint exercises and outcome-focused assessment. So these are key directions going further in order to deal with the challenges that regional organizations often encounter as far as security cooperation is concerned. The question of accountability is still key. Accountability must be multi-stakeholder and transparent. There should be public dashboards. People should be able to see information and gauge what is happening. And then there should also be interdependent evaluations and cross-sector oversight, indeed in itself can help maintain trust and ensure adherence to communities. These reforms, I think, set the stage for adaptive governance. And the next section, for me, outlines also a reflective learning approach that centers on learning from experience and adjusting in real time. So it's more about, hybrid security, a kind of a framework. And it talks essentially about blend of the formal and informal institutions. How do they work in a very seamless fashion so that we see results on the ground? And the results on the ground being that there is less attacks, and of course there is a relative peace, of course, that can be worked upon towards sustainability. And then it also entails continuous learning from field feedback, how to operate and how to operationalize their early warning system, and all other components that brings together, the civilian, the governance components, and even other non-state actors. And the question also of integrating peace building itself into development plans, which is very, very important. Often, peace building is seen, it's not really integrated or mainstream into development plans, but there is a nexus between peace building and development. I mean, a lack of development in itself causes insecurity, as we know, and if there is peace building, then you could enjoy the promise rather of development. And this is very, very important because hybrid governance combines formal state security structures with community-based and civil society mechanisms to respond to fluid threats landscape like ours. This blend enhances legitimacy in itself and also adaptability. Learning loops are essential because it institutionalizes after action reviews. You get field feedback mechanisms, and then adaptive programming so policies and programs can be refined incrementally as new information even becomes available. So peace building, like I've said, must be embedded in development planning to address root causes of conflict and build resilience. And as a practical illustration, imagine a program that modulates its targeting or delivery based on feedback. If a community reports rising tensions due to resource pressure, the intervention pivots to a livelihood component or a governance reform activity to address the grievance. So this is the kind of reflexive adjustments we are advocating, while preserving, even confidentiality where necessary. And to ground this approach, we must examine a concrete case study that demonstrates local ownership translating into scalable impact. We can go to the next slide. It's a case insight about the Plateau Peacebuilding Agency, which represents Nigeria's first state-led peace agency, established in 2016. Its role basically is to prevent the risks of violent conflict and to build peace together with a wide range of stakeholders. And on account of what the Peacebuilding Agency has done, it's been able to sign peace agreements between different, conflict parties. It's been able to work to broker peace and also establish its own early warning system, a mechanism really that has helped to douse tension and to also expedite the response of even, experts or even the security agencies to zones or troubled communities to stop the escalation of violence. The PPP case indeed demonstrates that subnational institutions can also breach national policy and community realities, and then offering a tangible, scalable model for peace building. A lot of states across our national space are beginning to see the value in adopting this institutional framework that we have piloted here in Plateau State, in north central part of Nigeria, because it has helped so much to deal with the challenges of peace and security, so much that we've witnessed some period of peace, some period of relative peace. That is not to say that the risk of violent conflicts have been removed completely, but at least we have a space and an opportunity to engage with the issues with a view to transforming them, and then, delivering on the promise of peace and security. So you see subnational level, national level, and regional framework working together, aligning, and all of that. So it's been a very relatively successful framework. And let's go to the next slide. Which is the policy imperatives based on the lessons that have been learned and the way forward. And I highlighted 4 actionable strands. First, our leaders have to build a political will and to ensure accountability to the people. Second, whatever decision that is taken to deal with issues of insurgency or terrorism or conflict or violence, has to be data-driven. The decision has to be data-driven. It shouldn't be just about mere wishful thinking or decisions that are taken out of emotions. It has to be data-driven. And the youths need to be given a source of livelihood, because if you interrogate closely some of the major causes of instability and the threats to peace stem from lack of livelihood, essentially from the young people, often who are left on their own device and then made gullible or vulnerable to all sorts of manipulations from the terrorists or the insurgents. Then, of course, there's a question of regional solidarity. So political will and accountability, we must forge cross-sector and cross-party support, implement dashboards that track commitments with transparent reporting. And when I talk about the data-driven decision-making, I mean investing in data infrastructure, indicators, and evaluation frameworks to ensure policy cycles are informed by evidence. And for the youth and livelihoods, we need to prioritize programs that reduce incentives for violence through education, employment, and social protection. And by regional solidarity, we mean strengthen platforms of dialogue and joint action, sustain momentum beyond crisis through institutional memory and learning. These imperatives translate into testable hypotheses for future research, I think, and even practical actions for practitioners. The path forward lies, I think, in combining rigorous analysis with adaptive governance, learning from field experience, and maintaining a steadfast commitment to inclusive governance. So let me close with a concise synthesis and a few prompts for future research and policy as far as these issues are concerned. And here is indeed my final thought. The central argument is that regional peace is shared destiny, and cooperation also defines sovereignty when anchored in inclusive governance and data-informed practice. Individuals, institutions, and communities each have a role. And I think that is the biggest thing we can look at. And my closing question perhaps to you as scholars is, how can your research design, data collection, or field collaborations advance this agenda in your subfield or even in your region? If there are any lessons you can also draw from the experience of ECOWAS. So I welcome conversations now, questions that you might have that might be helpful to your specific academic or even policy interest. So let me thank you sincerely for your attention. I know it's very difficult. Probably I might have spoken very fast in English, but I hope I make some sense and I will be able to have some ideas or some questions or some comments that will be helpful in terms of our knowledge and in terms of our future research. Thank you so much.
So thank you again, Dr. Joseph Lengmang. It was an excellent presentation, and I think it actually opens many questions. Of course, I don't want to take too much of your time, but at least a few questions that I would like to ask, and the students are welcome to ask questions as well. But in terms of your experience, which I see it's quite extensive with the Plateau Peace Building Agency, is this model an innovative model for Western Africa, or how did this model come up in terms of cooperation for security and peace building?
Yeah, it's a model like I said. I mean, it was a novel idea that we have introduced here at the subnational level, and because it came about because of the failure of previous administrations or governments to squarely address the challenges of peace and security. We've had experience of intermittent experience of violent conflict, sometimes ethno-religious, sometimes communal. The farmer and the herders, fighting over resources that are increasingly becoming scarce. And the response had always been reactive in the past, yeah? They wait until there is an escalation or an outbreak of violence before they will deploy security agencies to go and, to try to stop the violence. The harm has already been done. And that experience had, exacted a massive toll, a humanitarian toll, and has affected development in our state. So because the focus has been reactive, we've had, episodic experiences of this violence. So at some point there was a rethinking about the approach. So rather than being reactive, the thinking was that we should be more proactive. And that is the whole philosophy behind this institution that was put together, such that the institution would work with a wide range of stakeholders, including security agencies, the military, the police, and other arms of the security agencies, with traditional institutions, with religious leaders, with youth groups, with women groups, to address issues of conflict even before they escalate into violence. And it has helped significantly because beyond the transformation is a learning and understanding that is fostered by a true dialogue between the conflict parties, often mediated by the Plateau Peace Building Agency. In so doing, we have been able to see, tensions doused down. We have been able to see some level of mutual cooperation and understanding, leading to, the formal transformation of the issue to a solution. And then, of course, we've seen a downward, I would say, spiraling, or perhaps a dwindling in terms of the spate of violent attacks or intercommunal conflict within our own society. So it's a model that is worth replicating because of the value it brings. A move completely from, indeed, the reactive mode of response to the proactive mode of dealing with potentially dangerous conflict situations. And in the course of our work, we've been able to make friends out of communities. We've been able to create a level of understanding and even a cooperative framework between parties that have hitherto fought each other. They are working together on their own to transform conflict and to lay out conditions for peace in their community. So the high point of this model is that you are putting people in the center of conflict issues, and they are able to decisively deal with them without having to have an external actor, a government, often a distant government, coming to impose a peace that is not sustainable. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. Other questions relating to politics, international politics, and so forth. How, in your opinion and based on your experience, what has been maybe some of the limits to the regional cooperation, particularly in terms of also international or external actors like France or the British or the United States and so forth, the European Union, maybe other actors like China and Russia that have come also, that are also very influential in the region. So what would you say about that? I know that there's been some debates over ECOWAS because of it said it would eventually intervene in the Sahel states, but the intervention didn't happen, and that also has led to speculation about the implementation of different policies. So it's at least an overall opinion on that matter.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question, Jose, and one that sits, I think, right at the heart of contemporary sub-regional security and development discourse, especially in West Africa. But let me try to unpack it perhaps systematically. The context, of course, for us, ECOWAS being a regional actor, right? And it's been established in 1975, and it has, transformed into a hybrid political security organization over time. But it has done so much in terms of intervention, but it has also been grossly affected by geopolitical interest. The role of EU often clashing with that of China or Russia and all of that. And we've seen a lot of political fragmentation and sovereignty sensitivities in that respect. Member states often prioritize also national sovereignty, especially those who are aligned to, for example, Russia. And if there's an issue that requires a collective action, and then they refuse because they are loyal to Russia, and that collective action would interfere with Russia's interests. And these are vice versa also with the EU, for example, right? So when it comes to, many leaders view ECOWAS interventions, especially in governance and democracy, as infringements on internal affairs. So, for example, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger's recent resistance, I'm sure you're aware of that, to ECOWAS sanctions. And this is because they're aligned to Russia. And other ECOWAS countries are also aligned to the European Union countries or to the US. That is another point. Another point is the fact that there is so much institutional weakness and funding dependence. The dependence, of course, has consequences. ECOWAS peace operations like ECOMOG and ECOMIP have historically relied on external financing, mostly from the EU and the US. So limited contributions from member states undermine ECOWAS autonomy itself and its operational, I think, sustainability. Then there is also competing national interests and ideological divides, like I've said, Francophone versus the Anglophone divisions, and also differing colonial legacies often complicate consensus building. Political instability in some of these key member states also disrupts regional policy continuity. Then there is also the issue of capacity and logistical gaps. But in terms of the external actors and their roles, the EU is ECOWAS' most consistent institutional partner, I must say. They fund peace and security programs through the European, I think, peace facility, they call it, and also the regional indicative, I think, program. In terms of its positive impact, of course, they bring capacity building on the ground. They also help in institutional strengthening, and they support regional integration because they are the poster child for regional integration across the world, right? But in terms of the limitation, the conditionalities often align ECOWAS priorities with EU migration, counterterrorism, security agendas, subtly diverting regional ownership. That's some of the limitations, I would say. And for the US prefers bilateral engagement, right? They want to do directly with Nigeria or Ghana, and thereby weakening ECOWAS collective leverage. They don't want to really sit with, the ECOWAS to have a conversation, to have an agreement, multilaterally. They prefer to do it bilaterally with individual nations, and that tends to weaken the collective strength of ECOWAS as a regional organization who is poised to deal in an effective way with the challenges of peace and security. And for Russia, you know about the Wagner Group, right? And bilateral defense deals. That in itself, for example, signals a shift in the security landscape. But again, they offer alternative military support and challenges, especially when the West is trying to, bully a particular country within the ECOWAS. But in terms of limitation, it also undermines ECOWAS cohesion by also reinforcing bilateral militarization and legitimizing military juntas, resistance to ECOWAS norms on democracy. We've seen that in the case of Niger. We've seen that also in the case of Burkina Faso. I support Burkina Faso and Niger because I think there's too much influence, overbearing influence of European Union and the US and the West on ECOWAS and also on African countries. So I left to me personally, this is my opinion, right? I would prefer that kind of approach than what ECOWAS stands for, just being a lapdog for the European Union and all that. China, worth noting, engagement is mostly economic, infrastructure, trade, resource access, but it's not. But
refleja las tres claves sobre este tema. Nigeria, el nuevo blanco de donde.
Okay. Do I stop here? Are you okay?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, so to strengthen all of these things, for me, it's like I've said earlier on, that it's very important that ECOWAS build financial independence. They must enforce, I think they have a 0.5 community levy among members or something. I don't know when last most of the countries pay, but it's Nigeria that pays, I think, about 75% of what ECOWAS, and that's within the West Africa region. But even at that, the dependence on the EU is too much. There is a need to build a financial independence. There is a need to deepen civil, military, and civil society linkages to enhance the legitimacy of the organization. There is a need also to develop an African-led strategic compact, I think, for me, that defines the terms of engagement with the European Union, with the United States, with China and Russia. Then probably if I'm talking about inclusive, if this is important, inclusive governance and preventive diplomacy rather than reactive military intervention. So these are some of the things that, in a nutshell, I can tell you about ECOWAS' strengths and limitations, especially as it relates to external actors like the EU, the United States, Germany, and Russia and China.
Okay, very well. One final question, which I think it's important. Nigeria has been on the news lately because President of the United States, Donald Trump, made some accusations or saying that there's Christians in Nigeria have been attacked. And I wanted to ask you, right, questions about Nigeria in that sense and what you can tell us about that, because it seems like U.S. foreign policy is like all over the place, right? It doesn't seem to be very consistent. And one day Trump says one thing and then says another and so forth. And this question of Nigeria just came up around a week ago or so. So I just wanted to know your opinion on this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Nigeria has been very much in the news lately in relation to Donald Trump. And the dynamics, I think, are quite, significant, right? Trump has designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. I'm sure you know that, for alleged religious freedom violations, specifically citing the killing of Christians and stating that the U.S. will cut off aid and may even undertake military action if Nigeria does not act. You recall also that a U.S. congressman has also proposed targeted sanctions on Nigerian officials over the same issue of religious violence. Anyway, on the other hand, the Nigerian government has publicly rejected the characterization, stating that Nigeria is not, what was it they said, is not religiously intolerant. And that the challenges are broader, involving insurgency, the farmer-herder conflict that I mentioned to you earlier, the communal violence, not simply solely religious persecution, and that's based on the Nigerian's response. So markets and Nigeria's external borrowing are already reacting, I must tell you, despite threats. Nigeria launched a 2.5 billion euro bond sale, suggesting external investors are still willing to engage, though with caution. Why this matters, of course, sovereignty and domestic legitimacy. For a country like Nigeria being ruled by a foreign power and a U.S. president that we may intervene militarily challenges national sovereignty. That is clear. And of course, there are those who support that and those who don't support it within our country for whatever reason, right? The country, by the way, is deeply divided along religious lines, Christians in the one hand and Muslims in the other. But this division and all, but whatever they said, I mean, in terms of sovereignty, this allegation by Trump provides fodder for those skeptical of external interference. And gives the federal government a lens to frame crisis in terms of foreign imposition. So it's a very controversial issue, and the whole thing is wrapped around security and governance intersection. Of course, the trigger is framed as religious violence, but as you know, in Nigeria, much of the violence, farmer clashes, banditry, Islamic insurgency, is multi-causal. The external pressure, I think, ultimately may face the government to emphasize, to lay emphasis on more aggressive security response. I don't know if they could do much more than what they've done in the past. This indeed, if they, decide to advance the approach a bit, there will be both positive and negative consequences, no doubt. So it's a narrative about framing, but in terms of what I think, given all this, from my experience, I think we still have an opportunity for reform. I don't want Trump to come into our country, to invade the country, because the consequences will be there. However, I think there are issues that the government can really look inward and begin to question itself. And how do we get it right? How do we deliver on the promise of peace and security and providing for the welfare of its citizens, right? As an independent country. So this can bring about a lot of reforms if you answer the right questions, or if you ask the right questions I mean, if you frame the right question and answer it in the right way, it's very key. Our government must be able to, calibrate its response as well. Nigeria cannot afford blanket militarization or repression in response to external pressure. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't allow that. But I know beyond what you heard about, the claim of genocide and all of that, there's also a deep-seated geostrategic interest. Of course, Africa, Nigeria is an epicenter of perhaps another epicenter of a possible proxy war between Russia, China, and the US. Every superpower trying to flex its muscle and to pursue its foreign policy interests in a very subterranean fashion. But of course, by intimidating our national government, which is very, very unfair. Yeah. So these are the issues. It has divided the country. People are very apprehensive. The government is confused. Whether to kowtow to these threats by Trump. And there are some who are saying, yeah, it's welcome, because the government has failed its people consistently for many years. So it's a very controversial issue. It divides the population, and a very hot topic and debate in the country at the moment. I wrote a piece about it, which was published, I think, in a newspaper. I can send it to you. To you personally, to take a look. Probably you have more insights from my own perspective.
Yes, please. We should talk about cooperation, because maybe we could actually publish the piece in our...
Hello, Jose?
And yes, we could probably publish...
Jose, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes. No, I'm saying that we could probably publish your piece in our website as well, and the ICEPI's website. So I'll write to you about that, and we can continue. Hopefully, we can continue the cooperation. So we want to thank Dr. Joseph Lengmang for his time today. It's been an excellent presentation, very informative about the whole process of, thank you so much, Joseph, about the whole process of peace building in West Africa. And it will be it's an excellent model for us to study back here in the Caribbean, considering that there's also some conflicts that are raging around the Caribbean, actually. So thank you so much, Joseph. And I promise that, by the way, Julio excuses himself. He was going to be with us today, but he had other issues and he couldn't be here with us. But I will try to convince Julio, so we should go visit you. We should go to Nigeria, So maybe
you are really welcome. You have a home here anytime.
Thank you so much, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jose.
You're welcome.
Muchísimas gracias. Un abrazo grande a ti, a tus amigos y colegas todo, ¿ya?
Correcto. Un abrazo entonces a Joseph, y entonces quiero agradecerle a él por su tiempo hoy. Así que con eso terminamos nuestra conferencia de hoy. Oh, Joseph, sí. Ahí te veo ahora.
Muchas gracias.
Joseph.
Ya hablamos ya, sí. All right, sure. Thank you. Bye.
Buenas noches, buenos días. Chao.
Bye.